This morning, I've been asked, you have asked me, to answer a question. What do we say to our family and friends who are hurting? And I want you to understand that this is perhaps one of the most perilous questions for me to try and answer. I mean, this one is far more dangerous than a question like, why do good things happen to bad people? Because the expectations around a question like this are huge. Because we've all been there. I know I have, I'm sure you have been too. Been there with someone that you love and care for as they struggle because they've lost someone, or they're losing someone, or their life is falling apart in some way that they cannot control. And when you are there alongside someone you love in a moment like that, you would give anything to have a few words that you could say that would just make everything okay. So I know you're all out there. Got your notebooks ready. Come on, hurry up, just give us the words. The magic words, we can flip them up on the screen, we'll get them down. Then we'll all be set. Well, if that's what you're looking for, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. Because the fact of the matter is, if I were forced to tell you right now what you can say to fix what's wrong with your friend or family member who is hurting, I would have to say nothing. Nothing you could say to fix them. Not because there's nothing to be said, but because you're kind of asking the wrong question. I'm going to tell you a story. And I can tell you this story because you don't know what I'm talking about. It's a story that comes out of one of the congregations I previously served in. When I got to that congregation, I met an elderly couple, lovely people. Decades before I ever knew them before, they had been the parents of 3 wonderful kids. They had 2 oldest boys who were bright, intelligent, awesome kids. And they had a youngest child, the apple of their eye, a daughter. And that daughter, I was told, was just so beautiful and full of life and full of joy, and she made the world a beautiful place for everyone who knew her. Well, you might guess where this is going. That youngest child, that daughter, got sick. And in a desperate attempt to fend off the cancer that was going to kill her, her leg was amputated. Didn't slow her down. She learned to walk with a prosthetic and with crutches. She kept on going. She remained that same bouncy personality who looked at life with joy and with hope. And then she died, leaving her mother and her father and her brothers and a number of other people deeply, deeply hurt, as you can imagine. And I know why he did it. My predecessor, in one of those churches I previously served, because he was dealing with people who were hurting very deeply. And the emotions that they were dealing with were probably very frightening. I know they would have been to me. And so he wanted to say something to make them feel better. He heard them asking the question, why? And he wanted to answer that question. And so when he was asked to do the funeral, he tried to answer that question, why? He tried to make them feel better, and maybe he did make them feel better for a few moments, but I don't think he accomplished much healing that day. I know exactly what he said at that funeral because his words were repeated to me decades later, word for word, many times. As fresh as the day when they were first uttered. He stood at that funeral and he said that that little girl was too good for this world. So good, in fact, that God took her away and took her out of this world. And it probably sounded really nice at the funeral because in one sense what he was saying was that she was good and beautiful and that God loved her very much, and of course that was true. But there was also something in what he said that was very untrue and that was very damaging. And years later, those parents, I never met the sons, I am sure they had similar issues, but years later those parents rehearsed those words every day and repeated them many times and never stopped wondering how God could be so cruel as to take away that little girl who meant the whole world to them. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's been in there in that situation, and I couldn't even help them very much. Because though it was a lie, they believed the lie because it was all tied up in the goodness and the beauty of their daughter. You couldn't let one go without the other. I couldn't set them free from the lie. And I'm sure many others have been there, trying to pick up the pieces after somebody else, tried to make things better, tried to stop people from hurting, and really only made things worse. And we could probably get together, we could probably put our heads together here today and come up with a list of things that you should not say to people who are hurting. But you know what? You guys are smarter than that. And we can do better than just a list of do's and don'ts. And really, it's not so much about what you say as it is about why you say it. Because you see, when the people who mean so much to you are hurting, there is a natural reaction. It's scary when they're hurting that deeply. And it's very uncomfortable. And so there is a natural desire to want to get them to hurry through what they're feeling so that things can get back to normal, so that you can be more comfortable. And so the temptation is always to try and say something to get them through, to get them back to some more comfortable emotional place. But it's about motivation. And if that's why you are saying it, chances are, whatever you say, it's not going to be helpful. And it might be very hurtful. And so I would say yes, if that's your orientation, if you want to fix whatever your friend or loved one is feeling, you're probably better to say nothing at all. And it's not about what you say, really. Now, that does not mean, of course, that there's nothing you can do for your friends and loved ones who are hurting. Of course, there are. And some very positive things that you can do. In our reading we just had from the second letter of Corinthians, Paul talks about the ministry that God has to us when we are hurting. And this is what he says: "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies, and the God of all consolation, who consoles us in all our affliction." So what he's saying there is that God's primary response to us when we are hurting is consolation. And if you were listening to that passage, you heard that word, consolation, consoling, come up again and again and again. That's God's response, consolation. Well, what on earth is consolation? Well, the Greek word that Paul uses in that letter is the word paraklesis. Paraklesis. And what paraklesis means, quite simply, is it literally means the act of calling someone to the side of someone who is hurting. In other words, paraklesis is that response of just being there for someone who is hurting. So God's primary response to us when we are hurting is to just be there. Not to be there to tell us how to respond or what to feel, not to be there to answer our questions, but just to be there. And I want you to never underestimate the power of just being there, just being present for someone who is deeply hurting. I have experienced that many times in my life in ministry. Often, indeed, I have been called to attend to a family who's going through a crisis. I have been called to the hospital at times, even to minister to a family that I did not know at all. And I've been there and had the privilege of being present as that family goes through one of the worst moments in their collective life. And it's a privilege to be there, by the way. To be invited in, to witness and be part of a family at one of its most vulnerable moments. So I've been there. And I've got to tell you, often when I've been in that situation, I have said very little. I certainly didn't pull out any magic words that I said that made everybody feel better. And there were even a few occasions when I was there and all I said basically was who I was and why I was there, and that was it. But again and again, as I walked out of one of those situations, or as I met with that family at a later time, they thanked me deeply and sincerely for my presence. Because it makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. Just being there. And I know that sometimes when you have a friend or a family member who's hurting, you hesitate to be there. Why? Because you don't know what to say, right? I don't know what to say. How can I be there? Well, let me reassure you, your job at that moment is not to say anything. Your job is to be there. Doesn't matter. Even if you say almost nothing. They will remember that you were there. It will make all the difference. Of course, sometimes when people are struggling, there's a question that they ask. They ask it over and over again. They ask it of you. Why? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to someone that I love who didn't deserve it? And another reason, of course, why people hesitate to be there is because they don't have an answer to that question. They don't know what to say. But once again, let me reassure you, your job's not to answer that question. You're not there to answer that question. You may be there to hear that question, to listen to that question, to enter into the agony of that question with them, maybe to weep with them over that question. Like Jesus wept outside the tomb of Lazarus. What a moving scene. But you're not there to answer that question. And I'll tell you something, even if you know the answer to that question, I mean, even if you have an answer that you have found, at least for yourself, to be true, chances are it's not really going to be helpful for you to just give them that answer, because the reason why that answer works for you is not just because it's true. The reason that answer works for you is because you found that answer through your own personal journey, through your own sorrow and trouble. And that's what gave it meaning. And so if you just give that answer to them, it's not really going to help. They may get to that answer eventually, but they need to find their own way. And sometimes you need to step back and let them find their own way to that answer. So your job primarily is to be there. You also have a second job for your friend or loved one who's hurting, and that's to listen. Because often people who are really hurting, they do not have enough people in their lives who will truly listen to them and where they are. Listening can be very active, of course. It can be, asking probing questions, helping them to put what they're feeling into words. Or listening can be very passive, just simply listening. It really depends on the person and where they are. But the ministry of listening is incredibly powerful. We read a psalm this morning. We read it together. And it was basically one of those psalms in the book of Psalms that is called a psalm of personal lament. And basically what it is it's a prayer, or a song, or a poem, where the psalmist is just pouring his heart out to God. And a good proportion of that song is simply complaints. Look what they've done to me. Look what they're putting me through. It's not fair. It's not right. The psalmist complains and complains and complains. And what does God do? God's role primarily is to listen to all of that and to take it in. God doesn't answer. Yeah, the psalmist maybe works through and finds some answers on his own, but God doesn't come down with answers. God is the listener. So when you listen to your friend or loved one who's going through a hurtful time, you are doing something absolutely divine for them. And it's a ministry that we're all called to. Now, in that psalm, there's an incredible image that I think is going to stay with me for a long time. When the psalmist talks about what God does for him, this is what he says. This is what makes the difference. You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your record? So God is listening so actively to everything, attending so closely to everything that this person is going through, that he's keeping track of every toss, every turn in bed, gathering up every tear in a bottle as if it were more precious than perfume or gold, which of course it is. What a powerful image of how God responds to your friend, your loved one who's going through hurt. What a powerful image of how God attends to everything you're struggling with. And I know you will never be as good a listener as God is. But we're all called at times to carry out that ministry of listening, lending an ear. If you want to fix the emotions that your friend or loved one is struggling with, get them to a point that's more comfortable for you, no, there's nothing you can say. You're looking for the wrong thing. But you can be there, and you can listen, and you can walk with them through their dark valley like God walks with you. And you can weep with them. And that's the ministry that you are called to. Let us take a few moments in silence to reflect.